for all those nice things you said about me, Grandma. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming and paying recognition to all those who have proudly served our country, have sacrificed their youth, their innocence, their health, their livelihood, and even their lives, so that we may freely go about our heart's pursuits back here at home. I'd also like to thank Roger Tyler and the CHS choir students for practicing, or as we say in the military, training for this, and for coming here on your day off. Nothing hones your skills like performing, or as we like to call it, a live fire exercise. I hope that you will be enlightened today. I'd like to thank all of the veterans in attendance for their service. Without you, we may not be allowed to be here in assembly and say what's on our minds. And I plan on doing that a little bit. I hope that maybe today a story reminds you of a moment when you were in the service. I'd like to thank my wife, Luann, for helping iron my uniforms when I was in the color guard, raising kids when I was gone. It's tough on military families too, so thank those military families. Well, there I was, square in the jaws of death and no way out. I thought I was going to die. Well, that's how you start an exciting story, but I'm not going to have any stories like that to tell today. In fact, I've served a lot of communion to shut-in veterans that like to tell their time during the war, but rarely you hear stories of the battle, more so the adventure. The funny times, like the guys that had never been on a boat before and now they're in the middle of the Atlantic on a ship and they're seasick. Jerry Gobin's dad told me about the guys holding their heads over the side of the ship, and he laughed about it. I'm sure it took him a while to get to that place in his mind where he could laugh about it. At the time he recorded this memory, he was on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on his way to Europe. That ship could break down, get swallowed by the sea in a storm, hit a mine, get torpedoed, shot or bombed by airplanes. I'm sure he was worried about what he had to leave behind at home, putting his plans on hold. Plus, they were headed to who knows what Europe. And the story he tells me is about guys getting seasick. Herb Wyman, who's here tonight, after serving in World War II, was called back up a few years later to serve in the Korean War. Herb told me the story about a time during the Korean War that he had to sleep in the bed of a truck with two other guys, and they woke up with snow all over themselves. To his wife Louise's objection, he refers to this as the time he slept with two men. Alan Arnold, also present here, told me about the time his commander handed him a canteen. Alan took a drink. It wasn't water, and it burned all the way down. He put the lid on, smiled, and said, "Thank you, sir," and handed it back, just like a good soldier would do. Walter Blakely was a dapper dresser here in church with blue eyes that looked deep inside him. He confided in me about his arrival at Iwo Jima, and he told me there were dead ones everywhere, which I found out was more than he even told his wife. He didn't talk about it, she said. Veteran to veteran might be a little different. The war didn't just affect military personnel, it affected those at home. Eleanor Hampton, she had a girlfriend, and the girlfriend had a fella, and he was over in California getting ready to deploy to go overseas, and she wanted to see him before he left. So they hopped on the Kansas City Chief, which was a train, and she said, "My mother would die if she knew I was in the dining car playing cards with the GIs." And so they went on to California, and they got jobs in a pharmacy because it was a really quick job to get, and they wanted to stay about a month. They ended up staying on longer and got jobs at McDonnell Douglas, who was a defense contractor building airplanes and things. Very stressful at the time. The war effort was, we were just really cranking out stuff. So they brought in Hollywood actors, performers, at lunchtime to help relieve the stress. And that's sort of the romance of World War II that we see in the movies and things. Heard this in person. So, why join the military? Some didn't have a choice. Many were drafted. Many went seeking something outside their hometown. Some were told by a judge, go to war or go to jail. Some, like my father-in-law, joined the Marines to get a job they wanted, like being an accountant, instead of being drafted into the Army and told what job they would have, which he knew would probably be on the front lines. It's a volunteer Army now since after Vietnam. Why join in the first place? In the Army, we told our stories by singing cadence as we marched or ran. We were singing something like this. You haven't heard the word singing. Sitting at home talking to Joe, nothing to do and no place to go. My recruiter came to me, said, son, what do you want to be? I told him lean, mean, and green. I told him I want to be infantry. He set me down in a barber's chair, spun me around, and I had no hair. I had to pay for that haircut, too. Recruits aren't allowed to cut each other's hair. They actually have a rule on it, so both of you could get in trouble if that happened. You have to pay for that haircut, and there's nothing to it. I watched a kid in Kentucky who had hair like Bailey Wilson. Real curly, wavy red hair. I just watched it fall to the floor. I didn't see my head until 24 hours later. I didn't see a mirror. It's kind of a shock. But it's not like getting older where you lose them one at a time. Anyway, the drill sergeants make fun of you. They harass you. They want to find out who looks like Charlie Brown. There's one in every crowd, they say. They'll find him. And they can change your name in the Army, too. I had a choice. It was an all-volunteer military now. I hear on the radio every morning, all men have to register for the selective service within 60 days of their 18th birthday. It's the law. Makes you wonder if there ever will be a draft again, doesn't it? Inside, I always knew I would be a soldier. I loved hearing the stories from my uncles who served in Vietnam. Again, not war stories, just stories. Glory days stories. Stories about how mean their drill sergeant was, the practical jokes they played on each other. Or how a Vietnamese thief could replace your nice radio with a cheap radio while it was playing and you not even notice. Places they went, things they saw. I met a lot of combat vets growing up. I lived a mile from an Air Force base, so I went to school with military brats and had a lot of active duty and retired close by. A guy across the street who had lead poisoning his arm, but we thought he was cool because he had a motorcycle, a cute girlfriend, and a nice car. I heard the story about him from someone else, not him, and we had a lot of cookouts together, being neighbors. My baseball coach's dad, who was a local war hero, he had holes in his legs from machine gun fire. His sons told us that, not him. Makes the story even more exciting in a way. We just looked at his legs but never asked. A friend of the family that I only knew as Shaky Red, I was told he was tortured in Vietnam. His hands shook uncontrollably. Later I learned why they shook. He was self-medicated. He still had the ability to fix my electric guitar, and maybe he's why I wanted to know more about electronics. My friend Mike's dad had lost a leg after stepping on a landmine in Korea, and he said he was lucky because the guy behind him died. We all knew about his leg and even talked about his new leg. We just didn't talk about how it happened. No need to. I wanted to go somewhere exotic, hike mountains, explore forests, see foreign beaches, learn another language like the Army brats I was surrounded by. I wanted to be worldly. I didn't really think about killing the bad guys. And I didn't know what job I wanted to do. Their dads worked on F-16s. I just thought I would go off in the sunset on a motorcycle and come back home a soldier. After World War II, the movies made war almost romantic. My grandpa and I watched countless episodes of Hogan's Heroes and MASH. Yes, sometimes they showed the hard side of war, but they mostly were stories about making the best of your situation. It's neat being part of something bigger than you. That's what most appealed to me about the military. President Obama's pep talk last month to U.S. troops in Afghanistan called them the finest fighting force the world has ever known. George W. Bush boasted that our military is the greatest force for freedom in the history of the world, the greatest force for human liberation the world has ever known. Suddenly, you are part of the 1% of the population that protect the country. You wear the uniform. You get to drive big green trucks and fly around in big green airplanes and helicopters. Learn to become proficient with several different firearms, throw grenades, set off claymore mines, You're ripped from the exercise you were doing, but everyone else is, and somebody's always bigger than you. So you don't really think about it at the time, but you're probably in the best shape of your life. You fly all the time. By the time you're out of training, you've probably flown a dozen planes and are rattling off all the military aircraft you've flown. You're an exclusive member of a club that has a lot of benefits. You have free health care and dental and eye care, free life insurance, free financial counseling, free legal representation, retirement pay, none of which means anything to you when you're 18. Most posts have an NCO club. When you're 18, you can go in and have a drink. That interests most 18 to 20-somethings, which make up the bulk of our military. Old enough to die, old enough to buy, is what we said. I was picked randomly to go to this thing called the Timberwolf Project. The Oregon National Guard wore a Timberwolf patch. They were an administrative company, and they were responsible for processing active duty soldiers. So they got to do it 2 weeks out of the year, so pretty much all of our paperwork had to be redone once we got to basic. But they gave us our shots. We had to walk through a line, and they don't give you a needle. They shoot it through a gun. So you can't move or you'll get Zorroed. And there's probably 6 stops, so you get like 12 shots all at once. And they gave us a triple Taiwan flu shot. So none of us really remembered the first 2 weeks of basic because we had the triple Taiwan flu. You're on a first name basis in the Army. I had several first names. Private is what everybody is in basic, so they call you by your last name. If you have a complicated last name, they change it. Yep, they just call you alphabet. And you know your place in the alphabet, so you know if they holler out your name and somebody's name before you, and then they holler you know it's you. When you join the military and you're in a training environment, it's sort of like being in jail. Nobody's happy. Somebody is in charge, and it isn't you. You don't get to choose what you eat or when you will eat it, or who your roommates are. There are no women, unless you're a woman, and then there's no men. You count down the days until you're out. A honey bun smuggled back from the kitchen is a form of currency. I was assigned to Delta Company, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Brigade. They called us the Delta Demons. Suddenly you have 179 brothers and you're all in the same situation. Guys from all over. I was in basic with guys from the Philippines, Samoa, Puerto Rico, and other territories of the United States. Even a Baptist minister from Jamaica. There are guys straight out of high school or college, straight off the farm, and even straight out of an LA street gang on a go-to-war, go-to-jail proposition. But now at this moment and at this place, you are all equals. You are all Delta Demons. They instilled esprit de corps. I don't know, but I've been told Delta Company's good as gold. Our company motto, motivation, dedication, discipline, esprit, all stand for Delta, Delta 2, 3, whoo! Not just for your unit, but for the whole Army, and sometimes in a sarcastic way. They say that in the Army, the pay is mighty fine. They give you $100 and take back 99. They say that in the Army, the women are mighty fine. They look like Phyllis Diller and walk like Frankenstein. Oh Lord, I want to go. Drill sergeant won't let me go. Oh, hey! You may know that you're smarter than some of the other guys, and but you may not be fitter. You all have to work together so that you can get through, but not all make it. You end up making some lifelong memories with these guys, and you learn all of their names at one time, but only remember a handful. Everyone had a duty. We had to 1, 2, 3, 4, sweep and mop and buff the floor every day. I ran the floor buffer, mostly because I figured it out. If you fight it, it fights back. I've seen guys slapped up against the wall all the way down the hallway. We stripped the floor wax once a week with chemical stripper and then a different pad on the buffer, then mopped it up, then put fresh wax down. I think they just did this so that we wouldn't get bored. We buffed it again. We walked down the sides of the hallway so that we wouldn't, you couldn't see our footprints. When the drill sergeant looked down, he wouldn't see anything because we were walking down the sides. I do that still in schools. When I walk into a school, I'm in there a lot when kids aren't in there putting in technology. And the floors are all buffed right before school starts. I still do that. We had to make our bunks with hospital corners, polish our boots, iron our uniforms. I slept very well almost every night of basic training. Not so much during bivouac when we knew they would try to steal our M16s while we slept. Basic training is not easy and it is a challenge, but it's kind of funny looking back on some of it because I've forgotten a lot of the details. I've forgotten the pain in the arm. The first day I arrived, we had to hold our fully loaded duffel bags over our heads after arriving at 10 p.m. and having traveled all day. This was how our drill sergeants introduced themselves. How awake I instantly became the next morning when the drill sergeant beat on the metal frame of my bunk with a hammer. I'm glad I chose the bottom bunk, even though he only did this once. I forgot the pain in my legs from countless hours of physical training and the 20-mile road march over Fort Leonard Wood, gravel, and rocks, up and down the hills of the Ozarks. It was so rocky that they didn't even tell us to drop. They just told us to grab a rock. The mental pain as I read letters from home and wondered what my family and friends were doing. The mental strengthening we received by patiently waiting at attention or parade rest while we were in line for anything, including our meals. It was incredible watching 180 men get fed in 30 minutes. Food was not horrible except for the Swedish meatballs they killed. Some guys loved them. I gladly gave mine away. Cornish hen was my favorite meal. I would leave a perfect skeleton in front of you before you could take your first bite. They also served us steak once in a while on Sunday. I was there during Thanksgiving. They made a traditional turkey stuffing and cranberry sauce. This compares to my father-in-law's account after weeks of Marine infantry training and finally getting back to garrison of being thrilled with getting ground beef gravy over toast, which they referred to as something on a shingle. So, we're in the middle of it now, and we're singing. Whoa, 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 misery, misery. That's what the army is to me, misery, misery. We also sang this one. When I get up in the morning, there's a drill sergeant there. When I go to sleep, there's a drill sergeant there. Drill sergeant, why don't you leave me alone? Why don't you let me go home? We didn't train on Sunday. We had to do all our regular chores, but we could read the paper. We could go to church. Army church is non-denominational. That's kind of like going to Ben and Jerry's and all they have is vanilla. But no one yelled at you there, and you could pray that you made it through. Sometimes, Sundays, we got to march to the phone booths to make our 3-minute call home. Hopefully someone was home to accept the collect call. When was the last time you made or accepted a collect call? After several weeks of total control, they call it, and that's control of our diet and everything, we met a goal to pass our basic rifle marksmanship and were awarded a movie, pizza, and allowed to get a pop. We hadn't had pop since we started, since we weren't allowed to. Milk, juice, and water, that was it. We were looking forward to it. Some guys were excited about it. But then we got it, and at first it didn't taste right. It was a little too sweet, and then it didn't make us feel so good. It actually made us sick. I couldn't finish mine. The mental game they played with us were continued references to a fictional guy named Jody. The cadence was called during marching or running, was referred to as Jody calling. They took a character from old blues songs named Joe Grinder, or Joe D. Grinder, who was known to steal the ladies of inmates and soldiers, and they shortened his name to Jody. Jody was the guy that stayed back home and is enjoying all the things back home that a soldier's missing. And you kids know the song Scrub. Jody's a scrub, okay? Jody's the guy who's trying to get with your girl. They tormented us about Jody when we marched, when we ran, and even when we were doing push-ups. It really gets to you. Gets you thinking about back home. It really works on you. And so we were singing. Ain't no use in looking down. Ain't no discharge on the ground. Ain't no use in looking back. Jody's got your Cadillac. Ain't no use in calling home. Jody's got your girl and gone. Ain't no use in feeling blue. Jody's got your sister too. When I get that 3-day pass, I'm gonna kick old Jody's. I think we know what that is. But there we were all of us. We took the oath. We took the code of conduct. We abide by the code of conduct. And what's interesting about that is we, don't allow prayer in our schools, some places. And it's interesting that the military takes an oath in the name of God. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to the regulations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. I will never forget that I am an American, fighting for freedom, responsible for my actions, and dedicated to the principles which made my country free. I will trust in my God and in the United States of America. Article 1 of the Code of Conduct is required to be memorized by all new recruits. They changed this. They took the word man out when they started putting women in combat. It now reads, and this is from 1789, modified slightly, but still used. I am an American fighting in the forces which guard my country and our way of life. I am prepared to give my life in their defense. And so while we're talking about God, and I had dog tags. They only serve one purpose, to identify your remains. So what people know about you is now reduced to 4 lines. What is most significant to me about my dog tags, that in addition to my name, social security number, and blood type, it has a space for religion. When they made my dog tags onto the part of religion, it said none. And I was really freaked out by it. What if I were killed? It sort of defined me as some sort of irreligious libertine. Some people would have Catholic, Baptist, Southern Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalian, but those are just flavors of the same thing. I had my dog tags remade to simply say Christian, and then I was able to go about my duties. And if I die, at least they would know where to find me up in heaven. In only 8 weeks, we became physically fit, had memorized the chain of command, parts of the military code of conduct, the military alphabet, dozens of military acronyms and lots, hot and cold weather, survival training, learned how to take apart an M16, put it back together in 2 minutes, forced to take off our gas mask in a tear gas chamber and recite our M16 serial number. And if that wasn't enough for your social security number, and if that wasn't enough, they kept you in there until you choked, okay? We had live rounds fired over our heads while we low crawled under concertina wire. Well, like I said, it's easier to tell you in a song. We were singing, 2 more days and I'll be through. I won't have to look at you. Mama, mama, can't you see what the Army's done for me? They took away my faded jeans. Now I'm wearing Army greens. They issued me an M16 so I could be a killing machine. They issued me a bayonet. If they're still squirming, you ain't done yet. They issued me a hand grenade. You should have seen the mess I made. Mama, mama, don't you cry. Your little boy ain't gonna die. After basic, I went to a multi-force tech school in Denver. It was fun being in the mountains on the weekends, part of the adventure side of being in the military. We made a snowman in shorts. It's 70 degrees at the bottom and people are cross-country skiing at the top. When I say multi-force school, there was every branch of our military plus foreign allies. We had a Thai officer in our class. He was the highest ranking, so he was our class leader. School was sort of like college, except we were in class for 6 hours at the time. 5 days a week, over a year. I was a 35 hotel calibration specialist. They called us 35 homesteaders because we were there so long. We had military and civilian instructors. Aside from the 6 hours of school, we had 2 additional hours for military training, physical training, drill and ceremonies, CPR, aircraft identification, how to fold a flag for presentation, how to salute, when to call the room to attention, how to deploy a Claymore mine, just in case you forgot, and whatever they could think of to keep us busy. It's hard to forget how to deploy a Claymore mine. Right on the front of it, it says front. But then they added at the bottom, towards enemy. I'm thinking that was an afterthought after something really bad must have happened. They sent 15 of us. My first deployment was kind of a surprise for an expectant father. They sent 15 calibrators out of school to Korea. I had to do a one-year hardship tour of Korea, no dependents, more adventure, but a heck of a thing to do to a pregnant wife with complications. When you first get to Korea, you're faced with a number of different sights and smells. There's not a lot of litter. Their subway terminals have art in them. You see old ladies sweeping the section of sidewalk in front of their house. Everybody sort of cleans up. It smells funny. They eat a lot of kimchi, which is a fermented cabbage with red peppers in it. We actually learned to like it. But when you first get there, you lose your intimate space. You know, that space around you where, nobody gets. They're in it with their kimchi bread. And they want to try out their English on you. First you think they're rude, but they're just really curious about you. They watch American TV. We have a big influence on the rest of the world. You don't really realize that. Let's see. I was assigned to a mobile calibration team, so we moved around the country. I was assigned to Team 1, they called it. We calibrated test equipment on the small bases along the DMZ and the remote mountains. Our mobile lab consisted of 3 5-ton expandable trucks that connected together. I worked with 7 men, including our team chief and assistant team chief, so there were only 5 techs. We stayed in hotels except when we were in Uijeongbu near Camp Red Cloud for 30 days. That was a base made famous by the television show MASH. It was the biggest base south of the DMZ. When you first get to Korea, they give you some cultural training, teach you about the local transportation, food, and people. Make you aware that you are in their country and not to be the ugly American. Seoul is the second largest city in the world. We rode the trains, subways, buses, ferries, taxis, and we had to drive. They have a few customs. When you pass a bike or somebody, you honk the horn. Here you get hand gestures when you do that. They flash their lights. You'll notice on most cars you can do like this with your turn signal and flash the lights. They turn their lights off at a stoplight. They turn them down. And the reason for that was when we left in the 50s, we left a lot of vehicles there that still had generators in them. And when you go to an idle at a stop, the generator's not generating anymore, but it's still trying to power those lights off the battery, and they could stall, and there weren't a lot of car parts. So this became a custom, and now it's something that they always do, even with new cars. They're traffic lights. Our lights go red, yellow, green, but then theirs go, our lights go green, yellow, red, but then their lights go back yellow, green. So you know the light's going to turn green because it turned yellow. Well, we drove big V8 turbocharged diesel American-made Chevy trucks. And you could be 4 or 5 cars back in line, and the light is red, and then it turns yellow, and you pull out into the oncoming lane and floor it, and by the time you get to the light in front of the first car, it's green and you're first. Well, the cab drivers would honk because they knew what you were doing, and they would shake their fist at you. There we were, being the ugly Americans. It's something they did to new guys when they got there. They would freak out that they just pulled out in traffic. They encouraged us to take trips. I went to the city of Panmunjom on the DMZ to a building where the negotiations were held. I had to wear my Class B uniform with a tie, which is sort of the military business casual uniform. They didn't want us to look like we were warriors. We were told not to make hand gestures because the North Koreans would take our picture the entire time, and they could use an offensive stance as propaganda. In keeping with the rules of the time, the reporters asked the president for permission to print his answer verbatim. The chief executive responded that he would allow the newsmen to use his quotes. "We are not at war," the Times noted. One of the reporters asked, if possible action under the, or if police action under the United Nations would be more appropriate phrase. Truman said that sounded right. The term was eventually retired as a label for what presidents don't want to call wars. The police action lasted 3 years, and now 64 years later, there are still 30,000 American troops in South Korea. That's more people that live in our county. There's only a ceasefire in effect. No official declaration of peace has been given. We have more of a Cold War with North Korea. Occasionally, we give in to some condition to keep its leaders rich and its people poor, hungry, and oppressed. South Korea is about the size of Indiana. The Korean people are a mixture of ancient Chinese and Japanese cultures that was established over 4,000 years ago. Compared to our 200 years, we are still in our country's infancy, yet we find ourselves as a superpower protecting a 4,000-year-old survivor. You see the irony in that? All Korean men must serve 2 years in the ROK Army. The smartest and the best of them, if they're lucky, become KATUSAs. That's a horrible acronym for Koreans augmented to the U.S. Army. A friend of mine taught these KATUSAs. Her students were fascinated about her being part German and Swedish on her dad's side and Irish on her mom's side. They were Korean, period. As far as anybody could count, they were Korean. On the mobile calibration team, we stayed in hotels. The hotels had a few interesting traditions. They don't have a fourth floor. The number 4 is unlucky, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 5, right in the elevator. You had to stop and drop off your key at the front desk on your way out. Kind of like the old movies, you know. They still do that. I was in line waiting for my key, and there was a little Korean boy with his little Korean suit on, and he looked up at me. Maybe I was the first American he'd ever seen, you know, and so I was just, you know, I got your nose, you know, I got your nose. Well, he doesn't speak English, and I'm getting his nose. Well, this is the same thing that the cab drivers were waving at us. And I'm not trying to be the ugly American, but here I am. I'm flipping off a little 5-year-old kid saying, I got your nose. And his parents were kind of looking at us funny. And Mr. Yu, who I befriended, the hotel manager, had to tell us, he had to explain everything for me. So, we're going to skip ahead here. I wanted to say something about are we at war, because this is not the war my grandmother taught me about. During World War II, there was great sacrifice at homes. Things were made from rubber, leather, sugar, flour were rationed. Everything was sacrificed to support the war effort. They had to use ration stamps. They would say, fill her up, and hold up one finger for a gallon of gas. And then they had to use a ration stamp to pay for it. They had to use ration stamps for coffee, meat, cheese, butter, shoes. They waited in long lines because the stores would run out, so having a ration stamp didn't guarantee you anything. Even cigarettes were rationed. Grandma said she wouldn't wait in line for her brother's cigarettes. Some items like automobiles and appliances were banned for production until the war ended. Factories were converted to assist in the war effort. Most of the able-bodied men were drafted, so women had to go into factories to take over the empty positions. My grandmother worked in a casket factory here in Connersville that was transformed to make flares, parachutes, and bombs. She was just like Rosie the Riveter. There were national campaigns on being conservative. Why take two when one will do was put on paper towel dispensers. I actually saw one of the original one of these on a paper towel dispenser in Fort Lewis, Washington. America bought war bonds to finance the effort. Before 1940, only 10% of those employed paid taxes. Franklin D. Roosevelt implemented many new income taxes that are in some form now being collected. regular people, part of the war effort. So who are we at war with? Is it Russia? Obama and Putin had a very cold reception at the Olympics. Not the first time we've had bad relations with Russia during the Olympics. It was really scary when they tried to reclaim Crimea. I thought, here we go, Obama's starting World War III. According to Wikipedia, the Crimean crisis is a frozen conflict resulting principally involving Russia and Ukraine over the control of the Crimean Peninsula. Really? Frozen conflict? Aren't those just synonyms for Cold War? Cold War is a completely different thing, and according to historical timelines, it's over. I'm glad that we share an international space station with Russia. We need to champion our advances in technology in positive ways like this. Many of the things we buy are made in China. China must be our friend, unless you ask someone about the cyber war that's going on. Over 40% of the world's hacking traffic comes from China. I'm one of the veterans who got a letter stating that my information had been stolen. And this is really what I wanted to say to fix this community. What about heroin? Heroin is not homegrown. Opium poppies are grown in China, Mexico, the mountains and borders around Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Heroin is an attack on the United States, and we're feeling that one here at home. They're killing 100 of us a day by heroin, according to a 2010 CDC report, and we all know it's on a rise. That's 36,500 people a day, or a year. Heroin kills more people in this country in 1 month than U.S. forces have died in Afghanistan, and in a year, 3 times more than the number lost in Iraqi freedom in Afghanistan. In a year, heroin kills more than In a year and a half, heroin kills more than the 58,300 that died in Vietnam, and it just keeps killing. Yes, we're feeling at home. Maybe the world economy has kept us in cheap bananas, leather shoes, and discount cigarettes, but we're being picked off across all levels of society. It's not a rich-poor thing. It's not a color thing. A Fayette County probation officer told me that if you go to the methadone clinic in Richmond early in the morning, you'll see police officers in uniform waiting to get their methadone before they go to work. It's a money thing. Who's benefiting from it? Is our enemy killing us and profiting from it at the same time? You could say, and I haven't run this by the prosecutor yet to hear me out, U.S. heroin dealers are traitors. Look how we perceived Edward Snowden as a traitor for releasing secret government information. Some think he's a hero for letting us know that everything we do on our phones and computers is captured. During the war, if you're aiding and abetting the enemy, then you're a traitor, and you could face the death penalty. So are we at war, and is the Taliban our enemy? If it's found that the Taliban profits from heroin, then U.S. heroin dealers are part of the Taliban. You get my drift here? Apparently it's easy to get heroin into this country. We're faced with an immigration problem. The problem isn't the people, it's their undocumented status. We don't know who they are and where they come from. I went to White's Farm in Brookville. There's a guy in Africa, straight from Africa. He barely speaks English, selling Nike socks. I went to Chinatown in New York City, and there were guys from Africa with garbage bags walking around selling knockoff handbags and watches, knockoff Gucci's and Rolexes. They only knew a few words: handbag, Rolex. Think about going to Iraq and opening up a Kunkel's or a Pizza King in Afghanistan, or selling fake Rolexes, watches in Africa. There's a CVS right down the street here, built right across from the sheriff's department. It was built by a Mexican crew, and one of the few new construction jobs around here in a while. Did Billy go over and check for green cards? No, that would be kind of rude. Just because you look Mexican doesn't mean that you are Mexican, or illegal for that matter. We've all made friends, otherwise we wouldn't flock to the 2 Mexican and 2 Chinese restaurants in town. Plus, I heard from a police official that unless you have a whole busload of illegal immigrants, they don't come get them. They're too overloaded. Now, we have to keep our eyes open for things that are unusual. So it's easy to cross the border. Could something like Ebola be used as a method of attack? We're trying to stop them at the airport, but what about our Canadian and Mexican borders? And I know we all felt our world change with the 9/11 attack. Innocent civilians, this was an act of war by cowards. But our highly trained, highly skilled soldier, sailor, and airman and marine took action, found and punished those responsible, stopped the tyrant in Iraq, located and killed Osama bin Laden. Weapons or no weapons of mass destruction, we have to believe that our president and his military and security advisors with intel and counter-intel are privy to things that we do not know. We have to trust that there are some things we have to trust that there are some things that not everyone needs to know. Loose lips sink ships. 911 was carried out and planned by practiced radicals. They learned to fly, they studied the air routes, they were well financed. Then we get amateurs like the Boston Marathon bombing, killing 3 people and injuring others, or the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 and injured more than 680. Someone of a radical mindset versus someone trained with a radical mindset. When Columbine happened and all those weapons they had, they only killed 13 students, and I thought, my goodness, thankfully, that's all. All those rounds. If someone of skill had been in there, it could have been a lot worse. I guess that's what I'm referring to. I'm getting a timeout, so I'm trying to skip here. Yes, this is a war in our homeland. It's not always guns, mortars, and rocket-propelled grenades, but it's bombing innocent civilians, sending anthrax through the mail, hacking our computers, and getting our kids hooked on heroin. Now I can't buy 22 bullets. What's up with that? What can you do for your active duty soldiers and veterans? Keep America beautiful. Don't litter. Keep it like the military bases they were on. When you walk past a piece of trash on a military base, you're wrong. Keep being free by voting. Too few people enjoy their right to vote. Veterans outvote the population. I think you can guess who they favor from this last election. Keep volunteering in things that give people a hand up and not necessarily a handout. Pray for our country. Encourage and enable our youth to be more than we were. Go to church, choir practice. Keep going to dance and gymnastics. Keep playing and watching basketball, baseball, football, soccer, and NASCAR. Enjoy peace where you can find it. Keep the lights on in Las Vegas. Keep dropping the New Year's ball in New York. In my lifetime, I hope to see the redwoods and sequoias, Mount Rushmore and Yellowstone. Let's keep preserving national parks so that we have something for our troops to look forward to coming home. Keep exploring space, medicine, finding new ways to make energy. Keep creating things like Facebook and Pinterest and other peaceful ways of sharing and making friends. Keep embracing our way of life through traditions. Grandma, keep baking cookies. Remember the veterans who took the oath to allow you to do all these things. They suffered through basic training, all of them. They trained to become proficient in a skill, and they were sent off to do their duty. Some were in war, some were in things that looked like war but weren't called war. Keep your promise to them by caring for wounded veterans, their widows, and orphans for life if it's necessary. It's a small price to pay for the freedoms we enjoy. I have one last little song here, but it's sort of audience participation, so I might get a drink. On this one, every time I say left, everybody has to say you're right. And then when I say sound off, you say 1, 2. I say sound off, you say 3, 4. Then I say bring it on down. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, here we go. If I say left, you say you're right. Your father was home when you left. Right. Your mother was home when you left. Right. Your sister was home when you left. Right. Your brother was home when you left. Right. Your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, your auntie, your uncle, both of your cousins, your pappy, your granny, your maid, the nanny, all were home when you left. Right. And that's the reason you left. Right. The dog, the cat, the roaches, the rats, all were there when you left. Right. You dumb fool, you left. You dumb fool, you left. Ain't no use in looking back. Jody got your Cadillac. Ain't no use in going home. Jody's got your girl and gone. Sound off. 1, 2. Sound off. 3, 4. Bring it on down. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.